When my mom looked me in the eye and said, "You are not my daughter," I thought I misheard her. But then she cut me out of her will like I was nothing. My name is Harper Lane. I'm 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my relationship with my mom has been complicated. To the outside world, Claudia Lane looks like a warm, polite woman who always has the right smile and the perfect word. People think she's the type of mother who bakes cookies for school events and gives the best advice. But behind closed doors, her love always came with conditions, and her attention was something I had to earn. Growing up, I learned pretty quickly that my younger brother, Wesley, could do no wrong in her eyes. He was only 3 years younger than me, but he was treated like royalty. When he got into trouble at school, it was brushed off as boys being boys. When I made the honor roll, she would nod like it was expected and then move on to whatever Wesley needed. I was the one doing chores, keeping the house together, while he sat back with a smirk. After my dad passed away, things got worse. He had left behind some money, enough to make life easier if it was managed carefully. But instead of using it to help both of us, Claudia used that inheritance to spoil Wesley. New car at 16, trips he didn't deserve, gadgets he barely touched. I asked once if any of it could go toward my college tuition, and she snapped that I was ungrateful for even asking. I ended up working double shifts at a diner, then taking student loans just to get through school. Wesley coasted, never lifting a finger, while I broke my back trying to build a future. Even with all of that, I held on to the idea that maybe deep down she cared about me. I told myself she just had a strange way of showing love. But that illusion shattered one afternoon when she sat me down at the kitchen table. Her face was calm, too calm, like she'd rehearsed every word. "You are not my daughter," she said, steady and cold. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she didn't blink. She went on to explain that I would no longer be included in her will. Everything, our family home, the money, the jewelry that once belonged to my grandmother, was going to Wesley. She spoke about it like it was business, not family. And then she got up to pour herself a glass of wine, as if nothing life-shattering had just come out of her mouth. I sat there, frozen, trying to understand how a mother could look at her child and say something so cruel. But that was Claudia Lane. Charming to strangers, ruthless to me, and always ready to remind me that in her eyes, I didn't matter. I felt like the ground had opened beneath me. Her words kept echoing in my head, each one heavier than the last. If I wasn't her daughter, then what had my whole life been? Every memory I had of her tucking me in, every argument we had, every moment I'd longed for her approval, it all felt like it had been built on a lie. I couldn't stop asking myself, who was I really? When I tried to get her to explain, she only grew colder. She leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine, and said in a flat voice, "You were always a burden, Harper. You were never blood like Wesley. He's my real family. You're not." Those words cut deeper than anything she'd ever said before, and that was saying a lot. It wasn't just rejection, it was erasure. It was like she had decided I was no one, and I didn't deserve even a scrap of belonging. Memories started flooding back, all the little ways she had shown me I wasn't enough. I thought of my 9th birthday, when she forgot to bake a cake, but spent hours shopping for Wesley's new video game. I remembered sitting in the bleachers at my school recital, searching the crowd for her face, and never finding it, because she hadn't bothered to show up. Wesley had a Little League game that day, and she told me afterward that priorities matter. I remembered when I gave up going on a senior trip with my friends to stay home and work, so I could pay for things I needed for college, while Wesley got a week-long beach vacation as a graduation gift. At the time, I told myself she was just busy or distracted or doing her best. Now it all seemed like a long trail of proof that she had never really wanted me around. The worst part was how calm she seemed about it all. She wasn't crying or struggling with the decision. She was casual, almost smug. She pulled out some paperwork from a folder and laid it down on the table in front of me. "I've updated everything," she said, almost like she was talking about a grocery list. The will had been rewritten, and I wasn't in it. Not even mentioned. Wesley's name appeared on every page. The house, the savings account, the jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother, things I had grown up believing I'd one day share with my brother, were all his now. Claudia had taken a pen and erased me from the future of this family as if I'd never been part of it in the first place. I tried to speak, but my voice broke before the words could form. She just looked at me, her face cold and hard. "You'll get nothing," she said slowly, so there could be no mistake. "You were never mine." It felt like she had slammed a door shut in my face, and behind it was my entire childhood. I couldn't stop replaying the years of trying to win her approval, the small victories I thought I had earned with my grades, my hard work, my loyalty. None of it had mattered. In her mind, I didn't count, and now she had put it down in legal writing for the world to see. I sat there staring at the papers, my hands trembling, realizing that I had lost more than an inheritance. I had lost the illusion that I belonged. And the cruelest part was that she had taken it from me with the same ease as flicking ash from a cigarette. After that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again, "You're not blood." It left me wondering if she was telling the truth or just using cruelty as another weapon against me. I had grown up believing she was my mother, no questions asked. But now every memory felt suspicious, like there was something I had missed all along. I started digging through drawers and old boxes in the attic. Dust stuck to my fingers as I pulled out binders filled with old bills, receipts, and faded photographs. Part of me wanted to stop, afraid of what I might find, but another part pushed me forward. I needed answers. Buried in a folder, I found my birth certificate. My hands shook as I read the lines. It listed Claudia Lane as my mother, clear as day, and my father's name was there too. My first instinct was relief. It proved she was lying. But then another thought followed. If she had no problem fabricating stories to hurt me, could this paper mean anything at all? I brought it to her, thinking maybe she'd back down when faced with proof. She glanced at it, then smiled in that smug way that always made me feel small. "Paper doesn't mean anything," she said, pushing it aside like it was trash. "You're not blood, Harper. Don't cling to scraps." I stared at her, stunned. How could she say it so casually, like it was already settled? I wanted to scream, but the words got caught in my throat. She left the room without another word, her glass of wine in hand, like the conversation had bored her. The next day, Wesley found me in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, grinning like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Guess it's out now," he said. "You were never really part of this family. Just some stray Claudia took in." His words burned worse than hers. I wanted to shout that he was wrong, but the confidence in his tone made me falter. He seemed so sure, like he had always known something I didn't. I went back to my room and locked the door, holding the birth certificate against my chest like it could protect me. But the doubt kept creeping in. Claudia's cold eyes, Wesley's mocking smirk. They both made me feel like I had been living in someone else's life, wearing a role that didn't belong to me. That night, I sat on my bed in silence, staring at the shadows on the wall. If Claudia was lying, I had to prove it. If she was telling the truth, then I needed to know. Either way, I couldn't keep living in the dark. I made myself a promise right then. I would uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I didn't care if it hurt. I didn't care what I had to dig up. I had to know where I came from, and why the woman who raised me wanted to erase me so badly. I didn't know where to turn, but I remembered one person who might give me answers, my mother's sister, Marlene. I hadn't seen her in years. Claudia rarely spoke of her, and when she did, it was with bitterness. All I knew was that they hadn't been close since I was a kid. Still, something in me whispered that if anyone knew the truth, it would be her. I found Marlene living in a small house 2 towns over. She answered the door with surprise in her eyes, then softened when she realized who I was. Her hair was streaked with gray, her hands rough from years of work, but her voice was gentle. "Harper? My God, I haven't seen you since you were a teenager. What's happened?" I hadn't planned on spilling everything right away, but the moment she invited me inside, the words tumbled out. I told her about Claudia's cruel declaration, about the will, about how lost I felt. Marlene listened quietly, her face unreadable. When I was done, she sat back and sighed, as though she had been carrying a weight for years and finally decided to set it down. "There's something you need to know," she said slowly, "and it's going to hurt." My chest tightened. "Just tell me, please." She looked me right in the eyes. "You are Claudia's daughter. Don't doubt that. You were born to her. But your father wasn't the man you grew up calling Dad. Claudia had an affair. He never knew. Your real father was someone else." The words hit me like a punch. I struggled to breathe, my mind racing. I wanted to deny it, but deep down, some part of me recognized the truth in her tone. "She resented you for it," Marlene went on. "Every time she looked at you, she saw the mistake she made. She hated herself for it, but instead of owning it, she turned that hate onto you. Wesley came along after, clean and simple. That's why he's her golden child. You're the reminder she can't erase." I pressed my hands to my face, trying to process everything. I wasn't adopted. I wasn't a stranger in this family, but I wasn't the child of the man I had called my father, either. My very existence was tangled in my mother's lies. Marlene reached across the table and touched my hand. "Harper, listen to me. Claudia will destroy anyone to protect her lies. She's always been like that. If you push too hard, she'll lash out in ways you can't imagine." Her warning sent a chill through me, but it also sparked something fierce inside. I finally understood why my mother had treated me like I didn't belong. It wasn't that I wasn't hers. It was that I was too much hers, proof of the choices she wanted buried. For the first time, I felt a strange mix of emotions, rage at the years of cruelty, and relief that I wasn't some outsider plucked off the street. I was her daughter, whether she liked it or not. But I was also the shadow she could never escape. As I left Marlene's house, my mind was a storm. Claudia had built her perfect image on lies, and I had been the crack in that picture all along. Now that I knew the truth, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unfeel it. And I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't done. Not with her. Claudia didn't waste any time showing me how little I mattered to her. After the will was changed, she acted like she had been set free. She started flaunting everything she had, always with Wesley by her side. New furniture, expensive clothes, a shiny car parked in the driveway. She paraded it all like trophies, and Wesley lapped it up like a spoiled prince. One afternoon, she invited me over. For a moment, I let myself think maybe she wanted to make peace. Maybe she had thought about what she said and regretted it. But when I arrived, I realized the truth. She didn't want reconciliation. She wanted an audience for her cruelty. She looked me up and down the moment I walked in. "Is that what you're wearing?" she asked, her lip curling. "I suppose it matches your budget." Wesley laughed from the couch, his arms stretched out like he owned the place. She poured herself a drink and went on, each word sharper than the last. She mocked my job, the long hours I worked, the fact that I still rented a small apartment instead of buying a home. "You could have done better for yourself if you weren't so plain," she sneered. "Not everyone can be like Wesley. He knows how to live." Wesley chimed in, smirking. "Mom's right. You're always struggling, Harper. It's kind of pathetic." I felt the heat rising in my face, but I kept quiet. They wanted me to snap, to give them the satisfaction of watching me break. Instead, I stood there, nodding, letting their words wash over me. But inside, something cold was forming, something steady and unshakable. Later that evening, I went to get my coat from the hallway. As I passed the dining room, I heard Claudia's voice, low but clear. "When I'm gone, Harper will realize she was never part of this family. She'll have nothing." The finality in her tone made my stomach twist. She meant it. Every cruel word, every act of favoritism toward Wesley. It wasn't just about punishing me. It was about erasing me completely. I stood there, hidden by the doorway, listening as Wesley laughed. They were united in their little world, and I was nothing but the ghost standing on the outside. But as much as her words hurt, they also lit a fire in me. If she wanted me to have nothing, then I would make sure she didn't get the last word. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to keep playing the part of the discarded daughter. I left that night with a calm face, pretending her barbs hadn't landed. But in my chest, I carried a new purpose. Claudia wanted to humiliate me, to erase me from her story. I would write my own ending instead, one that would make her regret underestimating. I realized I couldn't fight Claudia and Wesley on my own. Their confidence, their smugness. It all came from knowing they had the money, the house, the paperwork to back them. If I wanted any chance of proving the truth, I needed someone who understood how to fight with facts, not emotions. That's when I found Ethan Cross. Ethan was calm, steady, and sharp-eyed. When I explained everything, he didn't flinch or look doubtful. He just leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and said, "If you want justice, we'll need evidence. Paper trails don't lie, even when people do." His confidence gave me a spark of hope. We started by digging into the financial history of my family. I spent hours in dusty filing cabinets, old storage boxes, and online records. Ethan guided me on what to look for: bank statements, trust funds, documents that didn't line up. One night, after nearly giving up, I found a folder that made my stomach drop. It was supposed to be my college fund. I remembered my father telling me when I was little that he wanted me to go to school without worry. But the numbers on the statements didn't match. The account had been drained years earlier, long before I even applied to college. I traced the withdrawals: luxury stores, car dealerships, travel agencies. Each expense lined up perfectly with the years Claudia spoiled Wesley. His car at 16, their vacation to Florida, designer handbags she paraded at family events. All of it bought with money that was meant for me. My father's last gift to me had been stolen before I even had a chance to use it. I showed Ethan, and he nodded grimly. "This is theft. She used funds that were legally yours. We can prove this." But the deeper we dug, the darker it got. We pulled up documents from the time of my father's death. Ethan compared the signatures on the inheritance papers with older documents. His sharp eyes caught it before mine did. The signature on some of those papers wasn't my father's handwriting at all. It was Claudia's attempt to copy it. She had forged his name. She had rewritten parts of his estate so that everything funneled into her control. My breath caught when I realized what that meant. Not only had she betrayed me as a mother, but she had stolen from me as a guardian. She hadn't just been cruel with her words. She had built her whole life of comfort on money that wasn't hers. Money that was supposed to be mine. I felt the anger rise in me like fire. For years, I thought her hatred of me was personal, emotional, something I couldn't change. But this wasn't just about her feelings, it was about greed. She had cheated me, lied to me, and made me believe I wasn't worthy, all while spending what my father had left for me. That night, staring at the papers spread across Ethan's desk, I felt something shift inside me. The pain was still there, but it hardened into resolve. Claudia thought she had buried the truth, that I would always walk away with nothing. She had no idea I was ready to fight back. I decided the best way to beat Claudia was to let her think she had already won. Around her, I acted quiet, small, and tired. I kept my head down when she mocked me and forced a thin smile when Wesley smirked at my expense. To them, it must have looked like I had finally given up, like I had accepted that I didn't belong. It didn't take long for Claudia to spread the story. She told neighbors, distant relatives, and even old family friends that I had come to terms with my place. I overheard her on the phone one evening, laughing softly as she said, "Harper finally understands she's not part of this family. It's a relief, really." Her smugness burned, but I swallowed my pride and played the role she wanted me in. I wore plain clothes when I visited, I stayed quiet at dinners, and I let Wesley laugh in my face without snapping back. Every insult became fuel I stored away, because I knew something she didn't. I was building my case piece by piece, and she had no idea. Behind the curtain of defeat, I met with Ethan regularly. We gathered every document, every bank statement, every forged signature. He spoke with a calm certainty that steadied me. "We don't need her to admit anything," he said. "The paper trail speaks louder than her words ever could." Still, Ethan reminded me that evidence alone might not be enough. That's when I thought of Aunt Marlene. She had already risked telling me the truth once. Maybe she'd be willing to go further. I called her, nervous that she might refuse, but she surprised me. "If it helps you, Harper, I'll testify," she said firmly. "I'll tell them about the affair, about how Claudia resented you. People need to know the truth." Hearing her say that gave me strength I didn't know I had. For so long, I felt like I was standing alone against Claudia's cruelty. Now I had someone in my corner, someone who had seen her for what she was. The days dragged on as I kept up the act. Claudia was glowing with satisfaction, showing off new jewelry, making plans for trips with Wesley, acting like her life was untouchable. At one dinner, she raised her glass and said, "To family, my real family," staring right past me. Wesley laughed and clinked his glass with hers, and I forced a smile like it didn't cut me open inside. But behind my silence, I could feel the tide shifting. The evidence was stacking higher. The witnesses were ready. The lies she had built her world on were about to crack. Every smug smile she gave me only made me more certain that her downfall would be worth the wait. I didn't show my hand. I didn't let a hint of my plan slip. Instead, I nodded, stayed quiet, and let her believe her fantasy. Because when the perfect moment came, I wanted her shock to be complete. And as I walked out of her house that evening, pretending to be small and broken, I couldn't help but think, the more she gloated, the sweeter her fall would be. Claudia's death came faster than anyone expected. One morning I got the call. She had collapsed from a stroke and never woke up. The news left me with mixed emotions. Part of me felt numb, part of me felt strangely free, and part of me was angry that she had left without ever admitting what she had done. The funeral was stiff and formal, filled with people who only knew the polished version of her. They whispered kind words, talked about her charm, her strength, and her devotion to family. I stood at the back, quiet, knowing most of them would never believe the truth of who she had been to me. Wesley strutted through the service like the heir he already believed himself to be, shaking hands and accepting condolences with a smugness that made my stomach turn. Not long after, the will was set to be read. We gathered in a polished office that smelled faintly of leather and old paper. Claudia's lawyer, an older man with sharp glasses, sat behind a wide desk, the document in front of him. Wesley leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his smile already forming before a single word was spoken. The lawyer cleared his throat and began. His voice was steady as he listed each item. The mansion, Wesley's. The bank accounts, Wesley's. The jewelry, the antiques, the family heirlooms, even the ones that had belonged to my grandmother. All of it went to Wesley. My name was not mentioned once. When the lawyer reached the end, he looked up at me, almost apologetic. Wesley, on the other hand, couldn't contain himself. He leaned forward, grinning like a child opening presents. "Guess Mom knew what she was doing," he said. "She wanted it all to stay with the real family." I sat still, my face calm. Inside, my chest was tight, but I forced myself not to give him what he wanted. If Claudia had hoped to see me crushed even from the grave, I refused to give her that satisfaction. I let Wesley gloat, let him laugh, let him savor his victory. And then Ethan stood. His voice cut through the room, sharp and steady. "Actually," he said, placing a folder on the table, "we have new evidence." The lawyer frowned, adjusting his glasses. Wesley's smile faltered. I stayed silent, my hands folded in my lap, my heartbeat steady. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Ethan slid the folder across the table. This will cannot stand as valid, he continued. We've uncovered financial records and forged documents that prove Claudia Lane manipulated her late husband's estate. In addition, we have testimony regarding the circumstances of Harper's paternity, which directly connects her as Claudia's rightful daughter. The room went still. Wesley's face drained of color, his smirk collapsing into confusion. The lawyer slowly opened the folder, his eyes scanning the papers, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I simply sat there, composed, watching as the lies my mother had built began to unravel in front of the one person who had always thought he'd won. And for the first time, Wesley looked unsure. Ethan's voice carried across the room with calm certainty, and everyone leaned in to listen. The lawyer cleared his throat as Ethan opened the folder wider and began to explain point by point. First, Ethan said, pulling out a sealed envelope, we submitted DNA testing before Claudia passed. The results confirm beyond any doubt that Harper is Claudia's biological daughter. He set the papers down on the table. The lawyer read them carefully, his eyes widening slightly. Whispering rippled through the room as relatives shifted in their seats. I stayed quiet, my hands folded, while Wesley shook his head. That doesn't prove anything, he muttered, but his voice cracked with uncertainty. Ethan didn't pause. He pulled out a stack of bank statements, each one marked and highlighted. Next, we uncovered proof that Claudia used Harper's college fund, the one set aside by her father. These funds were drained years ago and spent on cars, trips, and other luxuries that went to Wesley and Claudia herself. Every withdrawal is documented. The lawyer flipped through the pages slowly, his lips pressing into a thin line. Wesley leaned forward, trying to grab the papers, but Ethan slid them out of his reach. And finally, Ethan said, his voice sharp, we compared inheritance documents signed after Harper's father's death with earlier records. The signatures don't match. Claudia forged her husband's name to redirect assets into her own control. This is fraud, and the evidence is undeniable. The room fell silent except for the sound of papers shifting. The lawyer took his time, studying every sheet, then set them down carefully. Given this evidence, he said, his voice heavy, the current will cannot be honored. It is fraudulent. The estate will be reassigned to Harper Lane, the rightful heir. For a moment, I didn't breathe. I watched Wesley as the words landed. His face drained of all color, the smug confidence melting into shock. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked like a man watching his world collapse in front of him. Relatives stared at me with wide eyes, some whispering, others shaking their heads in disbelief. I stayed still, calm, almost cold. This was the moment I had waited for. The proof, the validation, the truth laid bare. Wesley finally managed to speak, his voice high and desperate. No, this isn't right. She's lying. This is all a setup. But no one believed him. The papers, the signatures, the DNA, they spoke louder than any denial he could throw at me. The lawyer closed the folder and looked at me with respect. Mississippi Lane, you are reinstated as the heir. All assets will transfer accordingly. I nodded once quietly. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching Wesley sink back into his chair, pale and defeated, was enough. Everything he had bragged about, everything he had taken joy in rubbing in my face, was slipping through his fingers. For the first time, I felt the power shift, and I knew it wasn't over yet. The estate was handed over to me piece by piece, just as the court ordered. The mansion, the savings, the jewelry, all of it was now mine. Walking through the halls that had once felt like a prison, I no longer felt small. This time, the keys were in my hand, and the weight of ownership was mine alone. Wesley didn't take it well. His call started the same night the decision was finalized. At first, he demanded things, money, the car, his share. When I didn't answer, the tone changed. He begged, his voice shaky, telling me he had nowhere else to go, that I couldn't just leave him with nothing. The next time I saw him, he stood outside the gates, looking thinner and worn down. Harper, please, he said, his voice breaking. You can't do this to me. We're family. I stared at him through the iron bars, my face cold. I remembered every laugh, every smirk, every cruel word he had joined in against me. I let the silence hang before I answered. You're not my family. The words came out steady, almost sharp. They were the same words Claudia had thrown at me, but this time, they were mine. After that, Wesley stopped showing up. I turned my focus to restoring what mattered. The first thing I did was put my father's name back where it belonged. His initials were carved into the stone at the front of the house, and I made sure they were restored, polished, and visible to everyone who entered. It was my way of honoring him, of giving back the dignity that Claudia had tried to erase. Aunt Marlene visited often during those weeks. She had stood by me when no one else would, and I owed her more than words. I gave her a share of the inheritance, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. She tried to refuse at first, but I pressed it into her hand. You told me the truth when it mattered, I said. This is yours too. One evening, While sorting through Claudia's things, I found her jewelry box tucked in the back of her closet. It was locked, but the key slid easily into place. Inside were the pieces I remembered her wearing with pride: pearls, rings, and a brooch that had belonged to my grandmother. At the bottom, folded neatly, was an envelope with my name on it. My chest tightened as I opened it. The handwriting was hers, sharp and careful. The letter inside was short. "If you're reading this, it means I failed. You were always mine. I just couldn't love you." I stared at the words for a long moment. They didn't sting the way I expected. They felt empty, too late, like ashes that couldn't warm a fire. Without a tear, I struck a match and watched the letter curl into flame. When the last ember faded, I closed the box and walked away. The chapter of Claudia's lies and cruelty was over, and I wasn't carrying it with me anymore. Do you think Harper did the right thing by cutting Wesley off completely, or should she have given him one last chance despite everything? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more.